Yes. All right, so I'm I'm trying to share it now through the
Okay, here I
Microsoft.
am. I'm sorry.
Hello, no problem, Zara.
Just left for a coffee at the bar here next to my house. I'm a coffee addicted. So,
That's okay. I was telling my
okay.
boyfriend that I feel like I've had a coffee, even though I haven't had a coffee. It's just the adrenaline of teaching.
Okay. I will just turn on. Is it okay if I turn on the camera and the thing because until I recharge?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, sure, no problem.
Okay.
No problem. Okay, so I'm sharing the presentation on Microsoft Teams just to make sure that everybody sees it and that we're on the same slide, on the same page, because I understood before the break that there were some issues with that. So I wouldn't want people to miss too much information. Okay. Um, Bushra, the same link. Do you mean do you mean the Google Drive link? The Google Drive will never change, and also I'm also the Microsoft Teams link will also in theory not change. I will keep using the same link, and I'll just change the date. Um, but so normally you're fine if you have the Google Drive link and the Microsoft Teams link. And I have also uploaded this PowerPoint presentation on the Google Drive. So in folder number 2, interpreting techniques. Yes, so before the break, we had a little bit of a discussion, polemics regarding interpreting and a definition and the differences between interpreting and translating, okay? So most importantly, remember the definition of interpreting. It is an immediate conversion of an oral message, right? Oral spoken message um, in a faithful manner, in a complete manner, and in a neutral manner. All right, these are very important principles for any kind of interpreter, not just not just public service interpreting. And we work from a source language into a target language. Okay, so this is the very compact definition of what interpreting means. Okay. You can revisit this definition once in a while, but obviously we will keep focusing on some of these aspects during the training, whether it is during the ethical code classes or during reproduction note taking, for example. We will keep seeing several aspects of this definition come back. Okay. So these were, in a nutshell, the differences between interpreting and translating. And interpreting as a more, let's say, group, at least you need at least 3 people in order to have an interpreting situation, whereas translation happens individually, normally at the translator's desk. There is time to revise, etc. There are no emotions involved, or very, very few emotions. Whereas interpreting is people work, just like I heard you um, during the introduction round. A lot of people said I like working with people. This will automatically draw you more towards interpreting than towards translation, although the two are complementary activities, let's say, within the bigger field of language, of linguistics, let's say. Okay. Maybe a question for everybody. Can anyone become an interpreter? What is needed in order to become an interpreter? Is it enough to know several languages? What kind of circumstances do interpreters work in? What are your ideas? Duan. You can turn on your mic if you want.
Okay, so I was saying that a professional training is needed. So speaking multiple languages don't necessarily mean that someone could automatically interpret. In addition to that, there should be some cultural context around it. So the historical and the cultural contexts around any language and around any case are super crucial in order to translate and spontaneously interpret the meaning. For example, in Arabic, we could use certain words that if they're translated literally to English, it's going to be either funny or a disaster. That's why knowing context is important.
Yes, so not just linguistic skills, but also cultural skills, being culturally sensitive is important. Thank you very much. Zahra? Yes, Zahra, we can't
Yes,
hear you. Yes.
I think also there are some qualities that could make an interpreter a good interpreter, because in a sensitive environment where we deal with vulnerable people, we have to have certain qualities. One of the most important is being unbiased. It's very important not to be judgmental, not to be not to take things personal, because this, I think, is really very important. It's not just that we have to have the language and the cultural abilities, but I think also this, and you have, in addition, to put yourself into the shoes of other people and be very, very objective and accurate. That's very important.
Yes, accuracy is also extremely important. That's very true. And with regards to objectivity, so you mentioned being non-judgmental. These are obviously very good skills. But I'm wondering actually if an interpreter could be judgmental on the inside and still deliver a correct, a correct and objective rendition of the message. Do you
I,
think
I,
that is possible?
I think, yes, it's possible. If you are
Yes.
logical, it's possible.
So we always try to make a distinguish, even within ourselves, to make a distinction between us as a person, our personal choices, our personal values, personal judgments, and our professional self, right? So it
Right.
is possible to, let's say, dissociate the two, but obviously the easiest would be to already have the skills, identify with that personality, let's say, with those soft interpersonal skills, so that it doesn't cost that much of an effort to render the message in an objective way, in a non-judgmental way, etc. Because basically we are always relying on how we get the message. So we listen, and then we try to be as little a filter as possible, if you understand what I mean by that, right? So the idea is that the message doesn't change while it goes through us. The only thing that changes should be the language, right? But not so much the message or the style or the register or the feelings behind it. That's how we try to think of ourselves as like the speaker, let's say. The speaker speaks through us, but in a different language, right? So in that sense, it can help to dissociate from your own feelings, maybe, or from your own values, because I can assure you, at some point, you will get into some situations where you cannot identify. Mostly, we can't identify 100% with another person. That's almost impossible. And there can be a lot of pressure during an interpreting assignment, but make sure you don't put that pressure on yourself. Okay, so you are allowed to take professional distance from the message that you hear, but still you are expected to deliver it in an objective and faithful manner. Okay?
Um, Sometimes also we fall into uh, a trap of ambiguity, shall I say. In
Mm-hmm.
this case, I always, what I do is I ask the social assistant if she gives me the permission to ask him to repeat the question or what does he mean in a more clear, because I don't want to pick up and just throw the ball on to the other party without being sure.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
We have to ask. And once I also found myself affected by the story, it was a psychological session,
Okay.
affected by the story of a teenager. I really could not take it. I was so into the story because he was explaining it in a very painful way. I
Mm-hmm.
had to ask for a break, like 3 minutes, because I felt that I was getting dragged and I could not finish to be objective. And this is also one of the things as interpreters we have to be aware of and we have to act upon, because
Mm-hmm.
continuing at that stage I would not have been able to really do something that is
To ensure
like
the
to judge
quality. Yeah,
myself from the situation. After
right.
all, human beings, we're trained to 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 be able to manage situations like this, but it comes sometimes that we cannot.
Mm-hmm. That's true. So I
So
hear
it,
two interesting examples in your explanation, Zaira. So first situation that you presented was what if the message is ambiguous to me as an interpreter? What can I do with that? Your solution maybe up till now was to ask the counselor, may I ask the client an extra question? Within the realm of public service interpreting, you can already ask that question to the client, right? So you don't need to ask for permission first from the social assistant or the counselor, okay? But you need to let the counselor know afterwards that the interpreter has asked an extra question for clarity, for clarifying some ambiguous information. So you need to be transparent in that. In that sense, it boils down to the same thing. It's just a different order, let's say.
I
Um,
think I got this from the commission where I used to work here in Italy. We're not supposed even to ask if something is ambiguous. We have to go back to the officer, tell her, and also tell her what we're going to say.
mhm,
We are
mhm.
not supposed to say. So probably I got this from there. So I got used to it, and I was doing
Yeah,
it. And I thought it was probably the thing to be done also in the
mhm,
centers in Fedacil. So
yeah.
I always asked, and I always referred also to what I had in mind that I had to ask.
Yes. So for us within the realm of public service interpreting, it is enough if you first ask your question to clarify your ambiguity towards the speaker, right? So whoever spoke last, you didn't understand them well, you ask a question. And then before you start interpreting the whole message to the other party, to the listener, you start by saying the interpreter had a question regarding ambiguous information. And then if you deliver the full message, basically you comply with your ethics code. So you don't necessarily have to say, the interpreter asks a question regarding the year in which they fled or
Yes.
etc., because then you create a story, you create more ambiguity towards the listener than if you were to present things in the same order as you heard them. So maybe you will find this as a relief
Okay, yeah.
Different
Probably.
ways of
One
working.
question I wanted to ask, and I wanted to clarify this. Sometimes we have people that come from villages, very remote villages where some of the medical facilities are not there, and they do not understand the terminology. For example, X-rays. Did you do an X-ray? This is a question that we ask during medical intake.
Mm-hmm.
You can see and you can read from the facial expressions that the person does not know, even if you say it in their own language, because
Yes.
they're not exposed to such
Yes, terminology. Mm-hmm.
So is it okay for me to explain that it's like a photo of the chest or something that they take of the inner parts to analyze, or do I have in this case to go back to the doctor?
In this case, actually, maybe it's a bit of an out-of-the-box answer or solution. Um, if the client doesn't say anything, then you don't say anything. It is actually up to the counselor or the
No,
doctor.
they tell me, ask him the
I,
if he has had an X-ray, and you just tell this. For example, in Tigrinya, it's Raji. The
mm-hmm,
X-ray is called Raji.
mm-hmm,
You ask
mm-hmm.
him, he's like, you can see that he's lost. He doesn't understand what is Raji, and then I have to explain the word Raji what it is.
No, that's where maybe you're taking too much pressure on yourself as an interpreter, but you don't have to. Actually, you aren't even allowed to explain. Yeah,
Okay.
so this would be an extra role that we are not allowed to take as public service interpreters. Maybe as cultural mediators, that would be a different question, okay? But within our scope, as public service interpreters, you just translate the question, have you taken an
X-ray.
X-ray? Okay. If the client doesn't say anything, then you have nothing to interpret. Okay. And also you resist the urge of interfering or over explaining. Um, or if the client says to you, I don't understand that word, then you have that to interpret. I don't understand this word. So as long as the conversation is fluidly, smoothly happening between both parties, and they give insight into their shortcomings or their lack of knowledge, for example, then that's the easiest, obviously. The most difficult is to see the client struggle and to not interfere, because we are not there as counselors, as assistants, or as doctors. And obviously the doctor will also see that the client is silent, but maybe won't know what the problem is. Still, this is a way to maybe indirectly empower the client so that they actually voice what is wrong, what is happening in that situation. So it's their responsibility to say, I don't understand what you're saying. Maybe they address you. In that case, you have to say the interpreter cannot be addressed directly. That's another thing we will see under deontology, under the code of ethics. But so to make a long story short, it's never a professional, it's never the professional path to interfere in the message, because then you're not being neutral anymore. Okay? And also returning to the idea of empathy and putting yourself in the other's shoes. It's really during those moments that there is a lot of pressure being put on our objectivity as interpreters. So try to find the balance between that empathy, but also your professional role, and stepping back and actually letting the counselor or the doctor pick up on the nonverbal signs. Whatever is verbal, you will have to tackle, of course. But when it is nonverbal, resist the urge and let the two parties draw their own conclusion and create the script of the situation for themselves. Okay. Thank you very much, Zahra.
Thank you.
I will ask everyone, so whenever you finish answering or sharing something, if it's possible to drop down your hands, so in Teams yourselves. So I don't know if Zahra, if you can see that small box. Thank you very much. All right, so then I can have a better.
Did it go down? I see it.
Now you can put it up again. Now it's up again, I think. I think you just need to click it once again. Okay, perfect. All right, so this was a bit of a, let's say, an introductory discussion on some aspects that obviously also echo our code of ethics. I have for you prepared a small video, which is actually a bit more funny than than just our PowerPoint presentation. So just a second while I load it. And I'll make sure that I can share it with you. I can share this YouTube video. Can everybody see the YouTube video? Okay. It's a short video, 3 minutes, luckily in English, but it doesn't matter too much. I think you will easily catch the drift of this video and see what's right, what's wrong about it, and we'll discuss about it afterwards. Let me know if the...
Oh, no. Jesus.
Anybody can hear?
You right?
No, I'm having a bit of a nightmare, actually.
What's the matter?
Well, I've got all the international CEOs from around the world in this room. In 10 minutes, the annual summit's supposed to take place. They've flown thousands of miles to get here, and my translator hasn't turned up. I need to find someone who can translate into 7 different languages.
Well, I can do that. Yeah, I did a TEFL in my gap year.
Welcome back to London, ladies and gentlemen. This is Helen Marsh, who'll be our interpreter today. So, without further ado, let's address section 1.1, multinational profiteering for the financial year 2005-2006. Helen.
Hurdy-gurdy-gurdy. Hurdy-gurdy-gurdy-gurdy. Gurdy. Oh, bud, bud, bud. Oh, bud, bud, bud.
E la no, ma no, che cosa ti dici, vado dici? Chico wa ya mo, in chong bawayo. Bongo, bongo, bongo. Bongo, 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 bongo. Bongo, 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 bongo. Bongo, bongo, bongo. This is not my sandwich.
Okay. Wait, video, yes. All right, this was obviously a humoristic sketch. Hopefully, Everybody can take the joke. This is obviously not how we're supposed to be doing our jobs. Let me just take back the presentation from before. All right, any ideas, any feelings about this sketch, about this interpreter, about how she tackled the job? I see here Faisa has written something. That's why we need to get a diploma before we become interpreters.
Yeah, I see she got like the sound of the languages, how
Yes.
the language sounds, but she don't get the vocabularies. That's what she did. So with the Korean guy, she went all the way like these things, and then no vocabularies. So it sounds like Korean, but then the same with the Italian, the same with the Swedish.
Yes.
That's what I see.
That's very correct. So basically, there's one very important aspect missing, and that's language skills. They were completely non-existent. She could just mimic the sound of the languages, but yeah, that's not what we are assigned for, right? We need to know more than how a language sounds like. We need actually a lot of linguistic skills, more than the generic speaker, let's say. Okay, so vocabulary. I'm glad Girmay can also laugh about it. It's very good. So linguistic skills, they were missing, unfortunately. Let me just see how I'm getting back to my presentation. Anyone else who wants to share what else was wrong with the
I would
presentation?
like to share my opinion, please.
Yes, please.
Actually, the blame is on the person who needed a translator. He didn't go to an official interpreter or translator.
Very good indeed. Obviously, the lady can say whatever she wants. She thinks she can be an interpreter. Obviously, she is not. But it's very good to notice that there was a level before her
Indeed,
who
yeah.
the person was managing her, so her boss was actually supposed to check her credentials. Obviously, this was not a very professional setting. Exactly, Bush are the credentials. Obviously, when we work as public service interpreters, we will only get assignments thanks to the fact that we have followed this training, that we have obtained a certificate, that we are registered to be freelancers, for example, that we have registered with several of these services, right? So that's very important to know that within our field, there is a certain official way to get to an interpreter, right? In this case, what we saw here, this is actually, in Dutch we would call this an opportunity interpreter, right? So it just so happens that a person who works with you in the same office says they know, they speak a certain language, so you just pluck them, you pick them, and you drop them in the interpreting setting, and yeah, you wish for the best. But that person has not been checked for credentials, for training, etc. Just know that that is still quite often the case, that people get into these interpreting settings without actually having the credentials, just because they happen to be nearby or they happen to work within a certain team. Obviously, budget and the financial part of all of this is important. So some organizations cannot afford to apply for an interpreter, to request an interpreter, because they would have to pay them a professional fee. or at least a volunteering fee, for example, right? So this can lead to quite bad situations. In the best case, they can be funny. In the worst case, they can have very tragic consequences for the client, especially since it's the client who comes to an assistant with a question, with a problem. And yes, we have a lot of people here in the group that have interpreted within the asylum procedure, for example. As you all know, very sensitive information. So we have to act as professionally as possible. Yes, Mahmoud, she did mimic the languages, so that's she's a very good comedian in that sense. But I think everybody agrees that you need a very good, a very solid vocabulary in at least the two working languages in order to call yourself an interpreter. All right, thank you for bearing with me in a in a funny sketch. I have a few videos lined up during this presentation still. Just so before I start showing you this slide, does anybody know what simultaneous interpreting means? What consecutive is? Do you have experience with any of these? I think Du already wants to chip in.
Yeah, so simultaneous from it's from the world, it seems that at the same time. So for example, at a conference, when the main language is English and then there's a French simultaneous interpreter, he speaks at the same time of the first person who's speaking. So the skills that are needed are a bit different than consecutive. Also consecutive from its meaning, it's something that then after it another thing. So it's what public service interpreters do. They listen, they take notes while listening, and then they interpret.
Yes. So very good definition, very good explanation of these differences. Here in the chat, I see that Zahra has experience with both. Bushra has done a lot of simultaneous assignments. So let's just drop down the list of descriptions. So simultaneous, for those of you who don't know, I've never heard of simultaneous interpreting. It means interpreting at the same time as the speaker is speaking, right? So the speaker has started producing the message, and very shortly afterwards, you start kind of like shadowing their words, right? You just leave a few words apart to make sure you have the correct sentence structure, okay? But basically, the speaker is talking and you are interpreting, right? This mostly takes place during international conferences, right? So conference interpreting. And yes, Busha, very challenging indeed. Personally, I have never done this, so I have a lot of respect for interpreters who function in this setting, because you have to sit in a booth by yourself. You wear your headphones. You get the message, so the message of the speaker goes right in your ears, and you almost don't even hear yourself talk. Or interpret, right? You create an automatic flow almost of interpretation, right? And also you don't have that direct link or direct contact with the speaker or with the listeners, right? One way in which they try to make this as possible, as easy as possible, let's say, is simultaneous interpreting happens into to the interpreter's native language. Why is that, do you think?
Because this is the easiest way for the interpreter. It's super difficult to listen. It's a difficult skill to listen and talk at the same time. Adding a third burden, which is to think in a third language, could be a bit challenging.
Yes, exactly. Obviously, interpreting is the production of an oral message or the reproduction of an oral message. So you will have to utter that same message in a certain language. And obviously, the easiest is to do that in your native language. That comes more fluently, more smoothly. You don't have to think as much about words, about um, techniques, or anything. So that's why it is always recommended to do simultaneous interpreting into your own native language as an interpreter. How about, so it's challenging as it is. How long do you think people can interpret in this manner in one go? Maybe I see here, Bushra, you've done that quite a lot of times.
Actually, it depends on the setting. If you're alone, if you're the only translator doing their job, or if you're with two other translators. So in the second case, of course, then you will take turns. You will then have to interpret for 20, 15 or 20 minutes. It depends on how hectic the speaker is, or you can then refer the rest back to your colleague. But if you are doing the job alone, I'm afraid it will be very, very tiring, and it's very, you need to use your concentration. It's very consuming as well. And at some moments, I have to say, you could lose some information of what has been said, because you cannot really follow up continuously. So it depends on the setting, but normally you will maximum take 20 minutes because after 20 minutes you're completely drowned, you're completely tired, your concentration will be gone. So that's why you need to give it back to your colleague, and then hopefully after 20 minutes you will recover back and you will start again. Yeah.
Yes. And do you have any tips on recovering? Not that it's important for our training, but how did you used to?
You just have to try not to concentrate too much anymore on the speaker. You just try to, but still you have to focus on, because you have to follow up with what is being said. I mean, the topic itself, but you do not have to concentrate actually on what the speaker is precisely saying. So in that respect, your mind will be a little bit at ease at that point. You will, because when you take over, you will know that the speaker is talking about, for example, something else, or is in the second phase of explaining something. So you need to catch up with what he's saying, and you need just to go forward. There are some cases where, for example, there are workshops, which makes it a little bit easier because you can interact with the persons, because usually they are in a group. And this is actually much more interesting, because you will have an interaction while somebody explaining something. And you have to translate to a group, and at the place, or if you're sitting at the same table, then you will see that the people will interact more to what you're saying, and they will actually be more attentive, so to speak, than when they are sitting in a conference room. So it makes it a little bit also challenging for the interpreter at that time. Yeah.
Right. Yes. Thank you very much for all the tips. So yes, working together with a colleague is almost, mandatory within simultaneous conference interpreting, because you need to take that break. And as a few of you have also suggested, around 20 minutes max, because during those 20 minutes you're really drowning and drained because of that information. So you need to take a break, and somebody has to take it over from you. I see here a few comments as well. Mohammed, for you, 10 minutes. Even 10 minutes, I can guarantee you it's long. It's very long to listen to somebody for 10 minutes, listen to somebody speaking for 10 minutes, and all the while you're producing the message in your native language. I've never done it myself, so a lot of respect for Bushra and the other simultaneous interpreters here in class. I see here Dua was writing that the interpreter needs a calm room, isolated, no distractions, and would be ideal to have automatic captions. Then the speaker should be aware that the speech is being simultaneously interpreted. Normally they know this, and to take this into account. Although taking longer breaks, by taking longer breaks and not speaking too fast. That would be a solution, let's say, but this is actually the whole idea of setting up a conference and having interpreters work in the back so that the participants at the conference can keep working, so that they can keep discussing, keep negotiating, etc. And so this is something that probably doesn't get taken into account, right? The break times for an interpreter, but that's why we have colleagues. So we have pairs at least in simultaneous conference interpreting, so that they can at least take their 15 to 20-minute breaks, right? But it's a well-known fact that these are very tiresome, very tiring assignments, and usually they take quite a few hours. It's not just, you don't just go there for 1 hour, you do your job and go home. Mostly it's half a day or sometimes even a full day. Okay, now consecutive. These are the two parallels, simultaneous versus consecutive. We are when we are interpreting as public service interpretings, we will be using the consecutive form. Okay, this means that the speaker gets to utter their message, produces the message, speaks, and then pauses. During the speaker speaking, we will take notes, right? It's only when the speaker ends their message that we will start to interpret. And obviously, hopefully, the message isn't very, very long. But obviously, the context for this kind of interpreting is not conferences, not international negotiations or summits, etc. It's usually in a social context, or maybe in some cases, police interrogations. Sometimes it can happen in court. I don't know, I'm looking at Bushra, because you have experience in court as well. Do you sometimes switch between simultaneous and consecutive, or how do you do it?
I'm afraid the prosecutor or the lawyer or even the judge, the investigating judge, they do not take into consideration that there is an interpreter. So I think for them it's a question of time. They just want to get an over and done with it. Okay. Even one time, the just voice was very, very low, and I couldn't hear him, but I couldn't hear anything what he was saying. And I had to stop him, and I said, sorry, excuse me, sir, I cannot hear what you're saying. And I think he got alarmed by that. And then it went well because he started talking slowly. And but the thing is that when you are interpreting in such a court session, it should go quickly, because they have actually, they read the report, what they have, what they are to say, what they're about to say, and then sometimes they stop and sometimes they don't stop. So it is up to us to catch up and to summarize some of the things that have been said. I'm afraid we tried. We have mentioned that a few times, but it's not always the case. So it doesn't. They don't take it into consideration, I'm afraid, sometimes.
I see. Yes. So the idea is that also in a juridical, in a sworn context in the courthouse, that you would still be interpreting in a consecutive manner, but that would mean also, yeah, getting the chance to take your notes and also getting the chance to interpret towards, yeah, the other
No,
party.
I don't think you will get a chance to take notes. No, you have to really rely on your memory. You have to rely on what has been said, and you have to be, very accurate and correct. But I have to mention that some of the suspects, I mean, who go to court, they are not highly educated people. And actually, they cannot understand also the judicial terms that have been said. And that makes it sometimes frustrating. I mean, frustrating for me because I'm trying my best. And then they start asking me in the middle of whilst the prosecutor is talking, what do you mean by that? What do you mean by that? And then you will get distracted and you'll get frustrated, and then you don't know what to do at that moment. Do you have to stop the prosecutor from reading what he's saying or not? So you come into these kind of situations where it's actually a little bit difficult, but in the social context it is completely different. It's a completely different setting, and it is much comfortable to interpret in such a setting.
Yes. So that's why I try to give you these two, let's say, extreme examples. So simultaneous for conference interpreting, consecutive for social context, public service, etc. And not go too deep into the exceptions or the settings where you're supposed to be able to interpret consecutively but don't get the chance to. Obviously, real life situations are always different than on paper, more or less, okay? But so in a social context, in a public service field, we can expect to be assigned consecutive interpreting, right? So then you get the chance to take your notes, and then you will also get the time to utter your interpretation towards the listener. Okay. Also, a difference between consecutive and simultaneous is that within the consecutive setting, usually you have a triad arrangement. Triad comes from the word three, okay, in Latin. It means that there are three parties. Think of a triangle, for example. So the interpreter is one part of one point, is one end of the triangle, the client on another point, and the social assistant or the counselor another point, okay? So then you have this or triangle like this or whatever, where people sit at the same table, or when is the case of remote interpreting by phone or by video, either the client sits together with the counselor, or the client is also at home, counselor is at home, interpreter is at home, but still you have these three parties that engage with each other. Whereas in conference interpreting, there is no direct interaction, okay? It's more automated, let's say, and it's also a bit more impersonal, okay? Another important difference in consecutive interpreting is that you will have to use both working languages, right? So you have a source language and a target language. Let's say your client utters something, your client is from from Ethiopia speaks Tigrinya, for example, right? You are an interpreter of Tigrinya, and you want to convey your message into English towards the social assistant, right? So they have a target language and a source language. But then, obviously, the social assistant will start speaking. So then English becomes the source language, and you will have to interpret into Tigrinya. So you have to have the same, almost the same fluency in both directions. That is the reason why we also test for both languages, or we require a certificate for English, for example, in case the language of lesser diffusion is your mother tongue. So this is a way for us to test that you are fluent in both directions, because you will need both languages. You will need to produce messages in both languages, okay? Obviously, as a public service interpreter, you will be working by yourself. You don't bring a buddy along to take over from you after the first hour, for example. Okay, so keep that in mind. You could say it's a calmer pace than simultaneous interpreting, right? So in a conference setting, the pace is really high, the concentration is extremely high as well, so it's very tiring for your brain, for your attention, okay? Within the realm of public service interpreting, this is a lot calmer, okay? So it's manageable to have assignments that last, let's say, an hour and a half. I've had a lot of longer assignments as well, like um, 2 hours, for example, or sometimes I've had to interpret a training day. So I was there 6 hours, for example, but then you get a break. Those are the exceptions, though. But keep in mind, you work alone, so you carry your assignment out by yourself. Okay, there's no backup interpreter to take it over from you once you get tired, or. But obviously, it is your responsibility to let the parties know if you would need a break, or just like Zahra, I remember now the second example that you gave, when the topic was too emotional and you felt that you were taking too much upon yourself, and that you were starting to maybe lose quality in your interpreting. That's the moment when it's your responsibility to tell the parties, as an interpreter, you need a break, 3 minutes or 10 minutes, etc. And they will definitely understand, because you are the only person who can judge whether your assignment is carried out in a qualitative way or not. Okay? This is an important slide in the sense that it gives you an idea of the differences between these main manners of interpreting. So it could be that you get some questions related to these manners of interpreting during the test. Okay, so just make sure you have these ideas clear in your mind, how these types of interpreting look like. Okay, what are the differences? And somebody else said, I think was it Mohammed or Osama? Yes, Osama said that you also have experience in both, and also in chuchotage, so whispered interpreting. Can you give us some more information, just for the other people to get acquainted with the concept?
Yeah, actually, you spoke quite about it during the explanation of simultaneously, because it is some form of simultaneous interpretation. You will be usually either trying to translate a small meeting or some sort of a bigger meeting, like summits and stuff like that. And within the smaller meetings, you could always use the consecutive way, because usually there's one speaker and a group of listeners, so you have all the time. But when it's a bigger meeting with several languages consumed within the meeting, so in this case, you will be only assigned or the person designated for a group of people, not everyone. And you either sit together with them in a corner or something, or otherwise technology is involved where you can use some headphones and stuff like that. I heard one of the colleagues here speaking also about a booth where you will be seated, isolated. So in this case, you are not distracted. Plus, you are not always translating directly from the speaker, because your speaker can be the main person who really does the speaking, or if that person speaks another language that you'd never know. So Korean, for example, you have to wait for that person who speaks the language you do. And then from that person, you take it into the language you're translating it. So it is tricky somehow and stressful. It's very stressful. Yeah.
Yes, it's a lot of pressure because at the same time, it's maybe you could say it's the worst of both worlds because you don't get the protection of a booth, let's say, like simultaneous conference interpreters. But you do get the pressure of being in a group, like consecutive interpreting, right? You are on site, or you have this interaction at least via video or phone, maybe. Although I don't think that would be very.
You couldn't be whispering anymore.
Doable. I think that's mostly on site. Chuchotage, yes.
It has to be on site. Whispering
It has to be on site, right? But so you don't have that protection of the booth, but you do have the pressure of interacting with at least the listener. And it's also a lot more difficult to relay the message once the listener also wants to participate in the discussion, right? They want to reply. Then it's a lot more difficult to take the word as a whispered interpreter, because yeah, there's a leader in that discussion, like you said. So it's a very complex kind of setting.
It is, and the hardest part of this, and that's maybe the biggest challenge that faces people who does whispering all the time, is that you don't get the direct connection with the people you are translating to, because they could be, for example, asking you, what do you mean by this? What do you mean by that? You don't have the chance to hear it and ask it and return it. It's a difficult situation, and you have to make sure you use the exact correct words, and it has to be informative enough for them not to ask back, what do you mean?
Yes, because we cannot relay the message since there are other interpreters being active in their own groups. So yes, this can also be a challenge when we do consecutive interpreting in public service settings in groups, right? So you have one presenter, let's say, and you are interpreting consecutively for your group of Arabic speakers, for example. I do the same for my Romanian speakers, let's say, but so not necessarily in a chuchotage manner. Okay, it can even be pure consecutive interpreting, and still you don't get the chance to relay whatever questions arise in your small group. So, okay.
That's true.
I'm looking at the rest of the other participants just to make sure that these differences are clear. Is there anyone who needs to ask a question? Anybody that didn't understand some aspect? Definitely don't be shy, don't be scared to ask questions, because these are the kinds of theoretical questions that can be asked, for example, in the written part of the test, right? So when we're discussing the world of interpreting, the different types of interpreting, the settings, what is a triad, for example, what are the differences between these manners of interpreting. So whenever something is not clear, please ask, okay? All right. I have also a video here to show you the differences between so in a picture and a video. Oops, sorry. And it's the experience of a simultaneous and a consecutive interpreter. Let me just make sure I can start this. Just a second. It's a longer video in itself, so it's definitely something you can take a look at. It's a full video of 9 minutes, but I will only share with you a few differences explained starting minute 145. So I will share the video with you. Can everybody see my YouTube or I don't know if it's the YouTube that you're seeing. Wait a second. Okay, I think we're in the right place here. Just to check if my with the audio.
Now, there are two styles of interpretation.
Can everybody hear and see?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Bilateral meeting, so it'll just be these four. Now, there are two styles of interpretation, simultaneous and consecutive. Consecutive is the most common style of interpreting in diplomatic situations. Here's an example.
It's been a while since I've been here. I'm so excited to be back. Thank you for having me.
And then,
Desde hace bastante tiempo que no venía, así que muchísimas gracias por recibirme nuevamente.
the interpreter waits until the speaker pauses
Estamos muy agradecidos de poder colaborar nuevamente con el gobierno de su país.
and then interprets.
We're very happy to be able to collaborate again with the government of your country.
Simple, right? But what happens if the speaker goes on and on without pausing?
Estamos muy agradecidos de poder volver a colaborar con ustedes.
Interpreters rarely translate word for word. Instead, we remember specific ideas and translate those ideas accordingly. But when the speaker goes on and on for a long time, interpreters rely on note-taking.
We want to authorize the use of the dolphin-friendly label by your country's tuna processors.
These symbols represent the speaker's ideas,
By the use of authorized equipment and fishing practices.
but each interpreter has their own style. Watch as 3 different interpreters take notes on the same sentence.
We want to authorize the use of the dolphin-friendly label by your country's tuna processors, but we must have a reliable way to verify the use of authorized equipment and fishing practices.
Interpreters usually come up with the symbols beforehand, and as you can see here on Caddy's cheat sheet, she carefully thought about what will be most useful for this particular meeting. The DFL stands for Dolphin Friendly Label. The TU in a box refers to tuna that's being caught. You get the idea. Now let's watch as Caddy interprets her own notes into Spanish.
Queremos autorizar el uso de la etiqueta de Dolphin Friendly para los procesadores de pescado de su país, pero necesitamos poder verificar que estén utilizando equipos y técnicas de pesca adecuadas.
Now let's switch to simultaneous interpretation. Simultaneous interpretation is usually used with earpieces and microphones and with interpreters working from a soundproof booth. But we won't have equipment in this demonstration. When we're right next to another person, like in this scenario, we can employ what we call chuchotage, which means whispering in French.
Considerar otro tipo de medidas para que nos...
This usually isn't ideal. Whispering for a long time is bad for the vocal cords. It can also be hard to hear due to ambient noise in the room, like ventilation. Now let's talk about pacing. In simultaneous interpretation, you try to maintain an optimal distance from the original speaker. This is referred to as décalage, or ear-voice span. We'll call it EVS. So when one diplomat starts speaking, the person employing chuchotage would probably start here.
We understand perfectly the preferences of the consumers in your country, and that is why we are coming together to identify.
Even if the speaker is speaking at 100 to 110 words per minute, which research tells us is the optimal speed for interpreting, the interpreter still has to figure out the optimal EVS. Here's the problem. The further back in the diplomat's speech the interpreter is,
de los consumidores de su país y por eso también queremos reunirnos con ustedes para encontrar una solución que sea aceptable.
the more the interpreter has to keep in their short-term memory. They're listening and processing as they're interpreting. It's a lot.
Is high-quality dolphin.
But get too close to the original speaker's words, and they may screw up things like grammar, syntax, and style.
The preferences of the, we understand that the preferences of the country of yours, that is.
And of course, interpreters are prone to fatigue and burnout. Fatigue will hit at around 30 minutes of straight interpreting. This is why simultaneous interpreters often switch out in intervals of 30 minutes or less. If pushed to our limits, interpreters can really suffer. You may recall the 2009 incident in which Muammar Gaddafi's interpreter collapsed at the UN after simultaneously interpreting for over 75 minutes. So what happens if the conversation turns emotional or the speaker?
Okay, you get the idea, I think. Now, even the ones among you who haven't had any experience in interpreting, whether simultaneous or consecutive or whispered, I think you got some idea thanks to this video. I'm seeing a few hands. I think Mugisha had a question. Mugisha, did you have any question for us?
I was just asking if you can share with us the link of that video. I really liked it, so I may watch it later.
Yes. So either way, it's in the same presentation of interpreting techniques that I'm sharing with you. Okay, so it's on the Google Drive, and I will upload my presentation again. And normally this. So on the Google Drive, you have folder number 2, which is interpreting techniques. And this is where I put the PowerPoint. You just have to scroll to the right slide and you will see the link. So this will be on slide number 8. Okay, so it's a longer video. It takes 9 minutes. But I think it's a very interesting one to see, and it definitely creates a very clear visual image of how these forms of interpreting are being organized. Okay, Louise, tell me.
Thank you so much. Actually, I have 2 questions regarding these 2 manners of interpreting. First one, for the simultaneous one, I have this question regarding into the interpreter's native language. So I'm wondering, like, what is the need of interpreting into someone's native language? That's my first question.
Yes.
And the second one is about the these other third manner, which is whispered interpreting. Like, what is the scenario? Like, what happened for someone to need to be in need of the whispered interpreting? Like, what is the scenario? I mean, the case.
Maybe let's start with the second question, since that was the last sequence that we saw. So in which case would this be necessary? For example, you also have this can be in diplomatic settings, for example, right? So a president is speaking and is trying to address the president of another country. And they both maybe have their own interpreters, or maybe there's just one interpreter for both presidents. And in that case, they need to speak both languages just as fluently. So it can happen that they need whispered interpreter because they cannot allow for the time for a consecutive interpreter to take their notes and take their time to interpret their notes, right?
Oh, yeah.
So in a sense, it depends on how much time is assigned for that meeting. Time is of the essence. In a sense, that is why conferences take place, so are organized with simultaneous interpreters, because in conferences, people don't want to waste too much time, right? They want to reach agreements. They have to present a lot of reports, maybe. There are a lot of participants and everybody needs to understand each other. So you can't have all that time that a speaker speaks always multiplied by 2, because that would mean a lot of just a lack of efficiency, let's say.
Yeah.
Obviously, this means that the interpreter will be a lot more stressed, will have to be a lot more concentrated. So it's just a different discipline, you could say, right? And in the chuchotage settings, like I said, you could see it a bit as the worst of both worlds. But you definitely cannot have chuchotage in a huge conference setting, okay? Because then you have just too much noise factoring in. You get disturbed a lot as an interpreter. So at least you have your own listener to focus on, right? And you sit next to them. So it's in smaller scale settings that chuchotage takes place. Yeah, but it's definitely also within a setting where you wouldn't get enough time as an interpreter to take down notes and interpret based on your notes, because that always creates almost double the time for that meeting. Okay. And your first question was?
My other first question was about on this part of simultaneous manner. So there's this third point, or maybe the fourth one, where it says like into the interpreter's native language, like what you meant, like they interpret in a native language. So I'm wondering, like, why they need, like, why is it necessary to interpret in another person's native language?
It's not in another person's native language, it's in the interpreter's native language. So when you do, if you want to apply to become a simultaneous interpreter, the easiest would be for you to become a simultaneous interpreter into your own native language. For you, that's Kinyarwanda and Kirundi both, or?
Yes.
Okay. So in that sense, you feel somehow organically that you find your words easier, faster, more smoothly in those two languages because they are your native languages, as opposed to maybe English, or maybe you consider English also to be one of your native languages.
Not really, not really.
See, so because usually we come from one specific background, and we have other acquired languages during our lifetime, right? Obviously, there are some exceptions, people who are raised bilingually, trilingually, etc. But still, there will be a top, right? Like top 3. What's your first best language, your native language? What's your second best language? Maybe it's also a native language if you're raised bilingually. But already towards the third language, you will start to feel a difference in vocabulary and fluency. So that is why the best way to work, the easiest way to work, or most efficient, is to be a simultaneous interpreter only towards your native language. So that would mean in your case, for example, the speaker will always be speaking English, and you will be always interpreting into Kinyarwanda or Kirundi.
Okay. So if I am getting it well, meaning like I will be interpreting in Kinyarwanda and Kirundi, but I will not be able to repeat it back to the English speaker.
No, because simultaneous interpreting doesn't have that component of interaction. It's not in two directions.
Oh yeah, I see.
That's consecutive.
Oh, okay, that makes sense now. Yes,
Yeah,
thank you so
probably
much.
because we're so used to social settings, and most of you have had experience in interpreting in a social setting with public services, that both parties want to interact with each other. It's not just a monologue, it's a dialogue, right? But in conferences, it's usually a monologue, right? So the people who are listening to you will never become speakers themselves. I hope that's clear now, Liz.
Yeah, it's very clear. Thank you so much. Now I get the point.
Thank you for your question. I'm happy to clarify that. Yeah, in my case, that would also be, I mean, I was raised in Romania. I moved abroad when I was 20. So if I were to become a simultaneous interpreter, you could say the easiest for me would be to just take any of the other working languages and say I can interpret from Dutch, English, Spanish into Romanian. Obviously, the more training you get, the easiest it would be to get another language at near native level, right? Just depends on your experience with that language, on your training, etc. But you have a lot less margin for mistakes and simultaneous interpreting. Also because it's just so tiring. So yeah, we want to avoid any other kind of stress on our brain and on our performance. Okay. Thank you. So we've seen a few elements in this video, right? The differences between simultaneous and consecutive. We even saw a small example of chuchotage, of whispered interpreting. When the video started, or at least the fragment that I showed you, the table was clear, right? And you saw the interpreters just interpret. They were, in the beginning, there were very short fragments. But then at some point, they took their notebooks out and they put them on the table. Can anyone tell me anything about note taking? Why would you take notes? When can that be useful? Osama.
Yes. Actually, if the speaker keeps going on and on, doesn't get the interpreter time to translate, taking notes is very important. It's the technique, the most important technique you can get. And but the thing, I couldn't get it actually, couldn't understand very well. Taking notes and icons. Like, is it like they were writing some icons and connected together? But the thing, is it okay for the translator or interpreter to, for example, write down like a part of the story itself?
That's a good question. I see Bushra has her hand raised up. Is it as an answer to Osama or maybe a...
Yeah, I will turn the mic off and I will listen to you. Yeah.
Oh, thank you, Sama. I just wanted actually to add on what you have already mentioned. It is actually a tool to enhance your memory. For example, people speak about dates and places, which are actually very important to note because you do not know all the geography of the world. So this is actually very important. And you take notes, for example, when they start indeed going on and on and on in the story. But then, like, he comes to a point, let's say he's talking about his journey that he took from his country to Belgium. So he must have made a lot of steps. He must have taken a lot of transport means. So you have to know these transport means. Is it to the train, with a plane? Is it on foot? All these things. So actually you have to devise your own method of writing down your notes of actually your own technique, how you're supposed to do that. And sometimes I use symbols, sometimes I use a whole word to do that. I mean, with a plane, with a train, you can draw anything, for example. I mean, this is something to do that you have to create your own technique to be able to have it as tool to enhance your memory.
Yes. Thank you very much for your
thank
answer, Bushra.
One
Osama,
more before I get the chance to some other student. Like, is it okay if the speaker, for example, like usual, they keep going on? Is it okay to ask if may I have the chance to translate this part and then they continue on?
that's a good question. Why do we offer this training? So that you will be able to let the speaker speak for a considerable amount of time. Okay, so by the end of the training and by the end of module 2, and also when you obtain your certificate, the idea is that you are able to hear a text, a fragment of 250 words. So this usually means that the person will be talking at a normal pace for 2 minutes, and that you are able to recreate that discourse, that speech, thanks to your notes and thanks to your memory techniques, right? So that is the idea behind our training. Obviously, if in a real life situation you notice that you can't follow anymore, just because maybe you're too tired, or the assignment is already taking quite long, or it's a difficult topic, maybe emotionally or maybe terminologically speaking, it's a difficult topic or difficult speech. It's up to you to decide. If you ask the person, if you interrupt the person and interrupt the speaker to say, excuse me, the interpreter would like to already interpret this part because it is getting quite long, they will understand you. But obviously, if you do this every time that they utter 3 sentences, then you will lose credibility as a professional interpreter, right? So you should be able to take quite a length, let's say, for the fragment, for the speech, but it's always up to you to decide on. Yeah, you need to be able to guarantee the quality of the assignment. So maybe if you notice yourself, you're at the end of your concentration, it's been a long day, or the assignment really just took too long, and you have the tendency to ask a bit too many times, to interrupt and to already interpret, that can also be a sign for you to say that the assignment can stop for today. Okay, so that would be an ultimate signal towards the parties to indicate that you as an interpreter, that your focus is finished and that you are too tired to guarantee the quality of the assignment. Okay, but that's the ending point. In between, you have these chances to interrupt the parties when you feel that you've taken too long notes, maybe you're already 6 pages into your notebook, and you feel like if you go back to the beginning, you won't be able to recreate the message anymore. I hope that's a good answer to your question, one that doesn't create any panic, Osama. And I think, yeah, you also had a, yes, tell me.
No, sorry, continue. I'll come after you.
Okay. And also I think, because it was the other Osama, right, who asked the question. Yes, and Bushra also recommended to you that, so note-taking is a tool. It's a tool that is meant to balance whatever you cannot remember. So you have memory on one side and you have notes on the other side. Okay, both combined lead to a full rendering of the message. Yeah. So they complement each other. You can see it like that. Okay. Just checking the chats here. Mohammed, a question for Bushra, when you take notes, right? Yeah, that was also a question that Osama asked about symbols and, or can I write a part of the story? You can try to write a part of the story. That's definitely something that we can experiment with during this first module, but you will quickly see that you don't have the time or the chance to write full sentences, to take down notes in the form of full sentences. That's impossible. Also very inefficient. You will miss everything that comes afterwards because you focus too much on a full sentence. Obviously, what we saw in this video was very abstracted. So these interpreters were only using symbols and abbreviations. So like initials, for example, right? Obviously, you can use words. I use a lot of words, like maybe even full words. That's not an issue. The only thing is you try to make your own mix of full words, maybe shortened words, maybe initials, and maybe symbols, right? So there's a gradation in how abstract you can go. But you will definitely not have an efficient rendering of the message if you try to write down full sentences. So you will get to see during this training which kind of words you drop, what do you filter out, and what can you recreate using your memory, also using your grammar skills. You don't have to write the, for example. That's the biggest waste of time. Don't write the, don't write or un, because these things you can recreate through the memory and through logical reasoning and through grammar. These are obviously the most basic examples that I'm giving you right now, but you will see throughout the module what you can leave behind. And sometimes if you're too tired, maybe you will write down more words. It's possible. But that's why I'm saying that this technique of note-taking is also, it varies within the same interpreter. Right? Sometimes you feel more inspired, you feel like you're really sharp and you just take very short notes, very concise notes, and otherwise you feel very tired, so you tend to rely a lot more on that page, right? Just to create that feeling of rest in your head. Okay, let's see what other questions we had here. Bushra tries to stay alert during the interpretation session. By doing this for a long time, you tend to train your memory to retain all the information. Yes, because obviously the paper, so when you take down notes, you're not doing memory exercises anymore, let's say. Obviously, with time, you will learn to extract information from what you hear. You remember one part and another part you write down in your notes, okay? But normally when we are interpreting, the memory exercises are usually already behind us, right? So we use whatever memory skills we have in that moment, right? If you notice that you have a bad memory, there are exercises that you can use for that, or or try to perfect your note-taking techniques. These are all complementary to each other. Okay. I see Bush also suggested some keywords to note, like arrest, police, jail, custody, etc. And obviously, when you prepare for an assignment, you can already know what topic you will have, and then you will start digging for terms, right? What kind of discourse can I expect? So what kind of words do I think will be used very often? For those words, you can even just use, you can shorten them with one capital letter, for example. Like if you're at the police, don't write the word police if you know that that's going to be a very recurrent word. Just write capital P, for example, right? That's a way to make your notes a lot more efficient. And Osama Al-Mohsen says it'll always end up as a simultaneous translation. I'm trying to understand what you mean by that, Osama.
The only difference is that you are not doing the simultaneous translation orally. You will keep hearing the speaker and do the translation on the paper as taking notes. And then you will read from your notes to the listener. So in somehow, it's a simultaneous translation, because while the speakers do their job, you're doing the translation on a paper, somehow.
I see. You're combining some elements.
Yeah.
We will definitely see what are the steps when we are interpreting. Obviously, when you are listening to the oral message, you are already starting to decipher, right? You already think about maybe some translations, but definitely you think about how do I translate what I'm hearing onto the paper. In that sense, you could, yes, you could describe it like that. I just want to make sure that everybody is very clearly on the same page as to translation is paper and interpreting is oral, so that we don't create any confusion. Okay. And just related to this video that we just saw, I wanted to ask you, has anybody listened to that part where they explain the ear-voice gap or the décalage? Do you remember that part? It was the short explanation, but they were giving some examples. A longer décalage, a shorter décalage. Does anybody remember what that referred to? They were translating it as the ear to voice gap. So it's connected to the interpreter's performance. What does the interpreter hear? So when do they start receiving, when do they start listening to the message? Okay, the speaker starts speaking, you instantly start hearing as an interpreter. But when do you start uttering the message? That time gap or time lapse is the décalage. Okay, so the delay. You can also say it's a delay between, and this is in simultaneous interpreting and in whispered interpreting. Because then you hear something and you start speaking. Okay?
How long should be that delay, for example, or short time?
That's a good question. What did we see in this video? We saw two examples of, so one was simultaneous, or both actually both were chuchotage. They were both chuchotage, so whispered interpreting, right? Let's say we can take that as a measure for simultaneous as well. And the answer was a few words into the first sentence. Don't wait too long, because then you miss the beginning. You lose that information since you're not taking down notes as a whispered interpreter or as a simultaneous interpreter, right? But also not after the very first word, because then you don't know how that sentence is structured, right? These answers are they apply to chuchotage and to simultaneous interpreting. But now I want to ask you, and then we will take a break. What do we do with décalage, so with that delay, within consecutive interpreting? What does it mean to interpret consecutively? Do we hear and speak, or do we hear and do something else?
We hear and take note.
Yes, perfect. Very, very good, Osama. So indeed, in this sense, it's not ear to voice, but it's ear to pen or ear to paper.
Yeah, prepare before to translate.
Yes, but it's still called décalage, just that it's a different, yeah. The concept or the explanation of the concept is slightly different for consecutive interpreting, like we work, like public service interpreters, right? What would you say, how long would you wait to start writing down? How big of a décalage would you take? Maybe somebody else do one? I can't hear you because of the mic.
Yes, sorry. I would wait until he had an understandable phrase or a sentence, and then I would write down the main idea and jump to this.
And with a phrase, do you mean a full sentence or a unit within the sentence?
Yeah, sometimes their full sentences could be too long, and because they're speaking, they're not really paying attention to when they stop. So I would hear the units per sentence, the main ideas, and note them down as symbols or abbreviations.
That's very good. So that's mainly the tip that I can give you. Obviously, you will have a lot of practice during the two modules, but the idea is to not start writing from the very first word. Also because English may have a different grammatical construction as opposed to your native language. I know Dutch definitely does, even more than English. So for those who speak Dutch, use that information to make it easier upon yourselves. So again, not instantly, don't start taking down notes instantly, but also don't wait too long, because in the same manner, you will be missing out on information. You won't be able to take your notes as fully as possible to compensate for losses in the short-term memory. Bushra.
Just to say something extra. I mean, when I hear, or when the person starts to speak, and I sense that that his story is going to be very long and maybe sometimes very complicated. I tend actually to raise my hands and as if to say, sorry, now you have to stop here because I need to translate what you have told us so far. Otherwise, I'm going to lose a lot of information about what you're telling me. And then I tell it actually to the supervisor or whoever is leading the conversation that I did mention actually this to him, and which most of the time they agree to the fact, yes, they have to be stopped at some time, because sometimes the other person or the leader of the conversation does not take this sometimes into consideration. Some people notice that and I think now you have to stop. It's now you have to give the chance to the translator or the interpreter to do his job. But some other, I mean, the speakers or leaders of the conversation, whoever they are, they tend to let it just go. I think it's sometimes up to the translator to choose the right moment to stop the person before getting into another incident or something that he has gone through again. Otherwise, you will miss up the information which he had told before.
Yes, and this refers to one of your Sama's question from before, I think, because obviously this is related to the ending of the message, right? It's not connected to when do we start, taking down notes. It's actually when do we stop someone or when do we indicate that the message is getting long enough or too long in order to ensure the quality. So just for the rest of the class to have the clear distinction between these two situations. So there's one situation in which you indicate that as an interpreter you would like to start interpreting based on your notes, otherwise you will lose information, right? And another situation is when do we start taking down notes? How much delay do we take into account? So how long is the décalage? Okay. Also, an important concept that could come up during the test, during the written part. Okay.
But is there an ideal décalage in principle, or is it very personal? So for me, it might be, I don't know, the idea or 5 seconds. For someone who has a stronger memory, it could be 30 seconds. So what would we answer in that case in the test?
I wouldn't say 30 seconds because then we're not taking advantage of our notebook as a tool, right? As a help, as an instrument. 5 seconds are for me great. For example, I tend to be on the faster side. So I prefer to start taking down notes earlier rather than later. If I need to change something in my note structure, then I will do that. But obviously, décalage is less sensitive during consecutive interpreting than during simultaneous. Because during simultaneous, whatever you've uttered, you can't take back. Whereas consecutive, you can still, like translation, you can revise. In that sense, you can even say that you can revise your notes before you start interpreting. So use that to your advantage, I would say. But 30 seconds would be a bit too long. Then you'd be missing out on the advantages of a notebook. Yeah. And like I said, one interpreter can operate in several types of shapes, let's say, right? If I'm in a great shape, then I would take a longer décalage without any problems. But if I were to be very tired, then I would really like to start taking down notes as fast as possible. And these gradations are visible even during the same assignment. You start out fresh and you end up tired, let's say. So give yourself the flexibility, the kindness to fluctuate a bit. So don't be too rigid or too rigorous about it. But do remember what décalage means. That is very important. Okay.
So it is an ear to pen gap.
Yes, the delay, yes, the time that you take between, so once the speaker starts speaking and when you start taking notes. Yeah, the time, the gap, the delay, etc. Yes, for consecutive. Okay, I would say we have earned our afternoon break. So let's take another 10 minutes. So at 10 past 3, we will be back for the last part of the presentation, okay? All right, see you in a bit.
Because reading this letter is because you like was shit.
Okay, I see here in the chat, Faiza, you were asking again, so what décalage means. I hope it's clear. If not, let me know. We can repeat, rephrase. The important thing to know is that when we ask for definitions or explanations or descriptions, there is no one exact definition that is the only possible right answer, right? So try to formulate your answers in your own words, right? So that you feel that you what you understand, that you also are able to convey in the answer. Okay, so, but it's good to know that everybody has some keywords that are present in the definition. So that's a way to structure your definition or your explanation. This will prove to be a very good technique, even for interpreting parts that you don't necessarily understand very well, or when you need to rephrase a sentence. Okay. Hope everybody is making their way back to our call.
Yes, we're here.
Okay, that's good to know. I know that towards the end of the day, there are less and less active webcams on, because like interpreters, we also get tired after a long day of performing, of learning. So definitely understand. But if anybody else still wants to turn on their camera just to make sure we end with some form of interaction, it's appreciated. Just to follow up on this slide number 9, there are 2 YouTube videos that you can still check out. So this first YouTube video where it says consecutive interpreting in practice, you have this hand, it says click. So just so you know, if you have spare time and you're going through the presentation, if you click on this link, you will actually get a YouTube video of a very interesting recording. I will try to share it here as well. The annoying part is I notice every time I try to share a YouTube video through my browser, I have to upload the presentation again. But for this purpose, I will make one last exception because it's very interesting. So under the consecutive link, you will get this video. It's an interpreter that interprets for President Obama and for who was this again? The president of was it Jordan or Iraq? I'm sorry for the confusion. Wait, I'll also play the video again. Iraq, right? Yeah. I don't think I shared my audio. Here we are. So I'll just scroll quite quickly through it because it's 13 minutes. But I wanted to show you this example of consecutive interpreting in a diplomatic setting, right? So between 2 presidents.
Yeah, I just want to make a brief statement about Afghanistan. I had the opportunity to speak with President Karzai this morning.
So first Obama is speaking, and he will be speaking for quite a while. So if I scroll through the video
of the recent election, as we all know,
and you see the female interpreter on the background, he will be talking
not only carry out
until minutes number
difficult circumstances,
6 almost.
Sense of a U.S. Relationship with a democratic Iraq is one that I think all of us are confident we can now achieve. So thank you so much.
شكرا جزيلا. شكرا جزيلا.
For your presence.
So he's speaking for 6 minutes. The interpreter has been taking notes for 6 minutes.
Just about Iraq as opposed to Afghanistan.
And the funny thing is,
and I don't know.
Obama asks her to only interpret the last part. This is like one of our least favorite requests as interpreters, because we've been paying attention to the whole discourse, right? We've been putting effort into our note taking, and then the speaker says only the last part. Just so you know, for our code of ethics, we cannot agree to that, okay? But I can imagine the interpreter doesn't want to get into a fight with Obama in front of the cameras. Okay, but when we are active as public service interpreters, just so you know, you have to decline this request and you have to say, I have the interpreter has the obligation to convey the full message, so interpret the full message, okay?
شكرا جزيلا. شكرا جزيلا. For your presence here today. شكرا. And I don't know if you maybe we could translate the last part just about Iraq as opposed to Afghanistan. Just in case there's some.
Yes, sir.
And as you see, she has to look for that specific part in her notes, so it's really a big drag. I mean, it's not even practical for the interpreter, because you form a story in your mind, right? And you just really rely on the structure of your notes. So whenever you have to just pop in midway or whatever, it really creates a lot of confusion and distress for you as an interpreter. So really not advisable, not ethically, not from a different perspective. But she will do very well.
أنا سعيد بأن ألتقي برئيس الوزراء العراقي المالكي معنا اليوم، وتناولنا عددا من القضايا، لا سيما التقدم الذي يستمر بإحرازه في العراق، ونحن والتزامه من أجل مسار ديمقراطي في العراق، ومن المهم أن تجري الانتخابات في موعدها المحدد، وأن أيضا شددت وأعدت تشديد على التزامنا لكي تنسحب القوات الأمريكية القتالية في شهر أغسطس من السنة القادمة، وعلى انسحاب كافة القوات مع انتهاء عام 2011.
I won't play it fully, just to let you see that she will also be speaking for quite a few minutes, till minute number
للأطفال العراقيين، والذي يرسم أيضا آفاقا أوسع للعلاقة بين البلدين. وشكرا.
شكرا جزيلا. شكرا السيد الرئيس. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. فرصة عقد مؤتمر الاستثمار.
And then obviously the other party starts to speak. The interpreter has to start taking down notes. This was the moment of the décalage. So you can hear her. You can see her waiting. Also, you have to relax after delivering such a long speech, such a long interpreting part. So her décalage is also a bit naturally delayed, let's say, because of her previous performance.
العراقيين، والذي يرسم أيضا آفاقا أوسع للعلاقة بين البلدين. وشكرا.
شكرا جزيلا. شكرا السيد الرئيس. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. فرصة عقد.
Right, so the president of Iraq utters 2 short sentences, but pretty simple sentences. So for the interpreter, it should be very easy to just jot them down fast. So she's not missing too much information. It's something that you can recreate.
مؤتمر الاستثمار الذي يعد تظاهرة اقتصادية ضخمة حضرها أكثر من 1000 من الشركات ورجال الأعمال ووفد عراقي على مستوى رفيع. هذا المؤتمر يعبر عن استراتيجي ينتقل إلى عملية البناء والإعمار والخدمات. شكرا جزيلا.
Thank you, Mr. President. And this opportunity to hold the Business Investment Conference is a big economic demonstration and manifestation of the importance of this event that brings together more than 1,000 business entrepreneurs and a very distinguished high-level Iraqi delegation. I have also discussed with President Obama the various issues and companies an opportunity to be present in investing in Iraq, and all this cooperation on the basis of the strategic framework agreement. And thank you very much.
Yes. I think Doa had a question.
Yes, a really simple and a quick one. She did not translate the first thing, like the greeting and stuff. Do we usually skip that when we do consecutive translation?
The idea is to not skip any parts. This was probably just maybe because I don't understand that much Arabic, of course. I was just assuming that during the décalage, she would either remember and interpret or note down and interpret. But maybe she tried to remember and she forgot. Obviously, if it's in your notes, there's no logical explanation for you to note down something and not interpret. So probably she didn't write it down.
So even if it's a simple good morning, good afternoon, or for example, peace be upon everyone, we should translate it.
Yes, yes. Yes, because we are not allowed to filter out information. Why are we there as interpreters? So that the speaker can have the guarantee that whatever they utter is also transmitted to the other party. So indeed, don't forget hello, good morning, thank you, see you next time. Don't just rely on nonverbal communication to convey those messages, because they also create a line in the discourse. Of course, they make the message a lot less aggressive, you could say. Okay. I see here Faiza had a question on the chat. Why didn't bring two interpreters? Why didn't they bring two interpreters? Sometimes for out of practical reasons. I don't know in this case why they didn't, but I think that her performance in English was very, very good, and I think her native language is Arabic, so I can imagine her performance in Arabic was even better. So in this case, there would be no real reason to bring two interpreters, right? Also, it's consecutive. So in consecutive interpreting, it's a lot more common to have one interpreter in both directions, right? If it were chuchotage, so if they both had their own interpreters whispering in their ear, yes, then you need two interpreters, because they need to work they need to work simultaneously, basically, right? So you don't have the hassle of moving from one party to another. I hope that's clear, Faisal, but it is a good question. You could have two interpreters, definitely, but if you have a very competent interpreter who can do consecutive in both directions, then why not? Okay. So that was the one video, and the other one is actually from the same series as the previous. the previous video. This is a very long one. It's 10 minutes, so I'll just show very quickly the start of
This is Kathy.
the video.
They are professional interpreters. This is Barry, and this is Kathy. They are professional interpreters who will be challenged to speed tests. Barry will interpret a financial speech.
We have seen that the GDP of Latin America and the Caribbean has increased.
And then Kathy will interpret a text message exchange between two friends.
I mean, have you ever seen Killing Eve? I mean, it's not that realistic, but I love it. Are you kidding? I've never seen it.
So these are examples of simultaneous interpreting, and pay attention to the décalage. So when do they start interpreting? Yeah, they have to start speaking in order to interpret. With consecutive, the décalage is in writing. Okay.
Is a little speed test from Spanish to English at different rates of speed.
Round 1, normal speed. On this side is the original text in Spanish, and on this side, a translation into English done by a native speaker. Let's see how Barry does.
It is an honor for me to be here with you today at the lecture series of the Americas, where well-known personalities have spoken from this pulpit. The importance of the topic that we will address, and the fact that it's the right time and the relevant forum to address it, simply show the constant attention and sensitivity of the OAS. And, okay, stop there. Hesitation. This is a new speech. I'm starting off cold. I gotta dust off the vocabulary so I can talk about finance and economics. And that sometimes can lead me to hesitate a little bit before I speak. And of the Secretary General, Jose Miguel Insulza, stop. Proper names. Gratefully, I knew the proper name here, but they can be some of the hardest out there because they can whiz right by you and you won't even know what hit you.
Round 2, fast.
It's a little bit faster, but still doable. When an episode of financial turbulence reaches the size and dimension that we currently see in international financial markets, there is no single origin. The huge expansion of credit in the U.S. mortgage market and the use of financial instruments that did not allow for an adequate measurement of risk. Good thing to stop right here. Missed word. There was some terminology that was actually quite specific, and it had to do with measuring financial risk. There was one of those adjectives that I just couldn't fit in, but I still was able to get the point across.
Round 3, even faster.
This really, sorry, I was getting back into my Dutch routine. So you can see here as well, what are the challenges for simultaneous interpreting? So when do you start interpreting? How much décalage do you leave? Have you prepared enough? Yeah, you don't have any notes to rely on, so you can, I think you can see the differences better and better each time that we show them. I don't know if there were any questions regarding this last video. And if not, yes, Zahra.
What if we get a language blockage? That this happens. I think, at least for me, it happens if I have to do very fast changes between one language and the other, despite the fact that I am trilingual. But it is sometimes I cannot find, even if I have the terminology, I cannot find it in any language. So I just get blocked totally. In this context, it's going to be very difficult because this is something political.
Yes, that can happen, of course, depending on the degree of how serious it is. Obviously, we always have to keep in mind to have a full rendering, right? A full interpreting of the message. So there will be no real excuse for that, let's say. But yeah, it happens to everyone. See, it even happens to these people who made these very professional.
In this case, can we ask them like to stop a little bit or no? Or to slow down at least.
So it depends on the nature of your issue. What is the nature of your issue? Maybe you didn't hear a word correctly. Could be, then you can.
It just comes a total blockage because you can't figure out the term and no language. It is there, but it doesn't come out.
Well, you definitely hear the word from the speaker, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that's something. Hopefully you've written it down. It's in your notes somewhere. Yeah. For us as consecutive interpreters, as public service interpreters, when are we confronted with this issue? This happens when we are trying to decipher our notes, right? So it could be in the middle of our interpreting performance, or maybe before we even start interpreting, right? Maybe you have a feeling that you wrote down this word from the speaker and that you can't let go of the idea, I won't know how to translate this. I don't have a, I'm having a blackout for this term, for example, right? You could choose to ask a question. You can do this before you start interpreting the whole part, or you can choose to ask your question during the specific sentence that you're supposed to interpret. Both are valid, okay? And you can ask the question under different phrasings. For example, you can say, the interpreter, although, yeah, okay. So wait, let me go back to the solutions, to the steps. The question is, if you understand the word in the source language. So that's what I'm trying to hear from you. Which kind of situation do you have in mind? You hear the speaker speak, you understand the discourse, you understand the term, and you write it down in your notes. Is it that scenario, that script that we're talking about? Zahra?
Yes, like for example, they will talk. Suppose we are talking about in the context of either medicine or psychology, and you go on like you want to interpret, and you're in the middle of the interpretation, and then you just get blocked. No notes will work, nothing. You can't even put the word back into what you heard. The word is there, and you cannot get it out like in an actual wording. It is in your brain. It's like it gets imprisoned in your brain.
Yeah. So this is a situation where you understand the message that the speaker is uttering or has uttered. Okay, you even have it in your notes, but you get stuck on the translation. You can't come up with the one-on-one translation for that term, right?
Yes.
So this is actually one of the best or easiest scenarios or scripts to solve, because at least you know what it means, right? So then your solution, in case you can't find the one-on-one term, if it's a very specialized word, it's a term, so you would have to use that one word. But if you can't come up with it, and that happens to us all the time, or definitely it happens, not all the time, but it has definitely happened and it will continue to happen. then you will be using a technique that we discuss later on in this presentation, which is called describing, right?
Okay.
So if you can't come up with that one word, at least you can come up with the definition or the description.
Okay.
So you try to keep that as compact as possible so that the listener understands what you are talking about.
Okay.
Yeah. Describing, paraphrasing, rephrasing, although rephrasing has to do with sentences, right? When I talk about description, Mugisha, as an interpreting technique, I'm mainly referring to a term that you can't come up with in the target language, or and we will encounter various occurrences of this situation, a term that cannot be translated in another language. Maybe because it's, yeah, I'm not talking about services, for example, but concepts. For example, here in Flanders, we have one type of social welfare that is called leefloon. And maybe some of you have heard about it through OCMW, through Fedazil. Okay, but this term does not exist in any dictionary, Dutch to English, Dutch to Arabic, etc. So you can't even rely on that one specific translation of leefloon, which basically implies welfare in order to cover your basic needs. It's like a subsistence welfare, right? So you will have to use descriptions anyway. This is very interesting to train because you will have to use it in the case of these untranslatable terms, terms that do not exist in another language or in another social system. But in the medical system or medical field, you can expect there to be translations, right? But maybe you can't come up with it, or you used to be able to and you can't. For all of these situations, you can use a description. And that is why our question on the test is relevant. So the first part of the written test consists, or the first question on the written test consists of 3 descriptions, 3 definitions, right? How would you describe, or how would you define interpreting? How would you define décalage? How would you define this or that? Why? Because this creates a skill through which you are able to describe a word, describe a term, instead of relying on that one-on-one translation. I hope you see where I'm getting at, Sandra?
Yes, yes, yes. Thank you.
Yeah. And obviously now you came up with the darkest scenario, the biggest nightmare that we could ever imagine ourselves in as interpreters. But I'm here to show you that there is a solution for everything, right? So even this horrible scenario that we might perceive as shameful and embarrassing, etc. There is a very easy way to go around it, and also not put that pressure on yourself, because the more negative feelings you get during an assignment, the more that will impact your assignment negatively, the rest of your assignment, right? Because you keep adding layers of, I didn't solve this right, I didn't solve this right, when there are really very legitimate ways of solving these issues, and know that they happen to everybody. So that's why during the training, we try to give you the best way to ethically deal with these issues. I hope that's okay and a bit reassuring.
No, great. Yes, thank you so much.
Nice. Thank you for the question. Dua?
So when the answer is a bit long, I tend to lose track of it. So just to make sure I got the point through, when we forget the meaning of a word, we use the definition of it instead.
No, because it's when we forget the translation of a word.
Translation, yeah.
Yes, the translation. Then we can use the definition.
Oh, yeah,
which is a longer, right? Because we know the meaning.
Yes.
That's the best scenario. The worst scenario would be we hear a word from the speaker, we don't know what it means. Even for that, there's a simple solution. You ask the speaker to give a description or a definition.
Yeah, perfectly.
Okay. But obviously, we don't want to do that like 10 times during an assignment because then it comes over as unprofessional. Okay?
Okay, yeah.
All right, great. So aside from the types of interpreting, we also have different types of interpreters, right? So based on their skills, on their education, etc. So we have a couple of, so a number of trained interpreters, let's say, for example, people who have a master's degree in interpreting, right? People who are conference interpreters, business interpreters, court, legal, or sworn interpreters. Okay, they are synonyms. Sign language interpreters are also different, so a different category. Asylum interpreters, a few of you have this experience as well with the Commissioner General of the Stateless and Refugees, and also public service interpreting. So there are some aspects through which these categories differ. For example, somebody, so a master in interpreting is just defined by their diploma, right? By their academic diploma. So the fact that they have obtained a master's degree takes 1 year to study. Here in Belgium, there are 4 universities that offer this kind of program. Mostly they focus on consecutive interpreting and sometimes simultaneous. But they study very different fields of work. Also, in the meantime, public service interpreting has become a part of the curriculum at universities as well. So this is good news for us that that our field of work is getting more attention, more popular, and in many cases, so a lot of the students who are enrolled in a Masters of Interpreting, they also have the chance to take our certification exam. So in that way, they can also continue in their professional career as a public service interpreter, okay? But they still need to take the same exam that you will be taking. Yes, but also the languages that are being offered in such a program are a lot more limited than what we offer. Mostly it's English, French, German, Italian, etc. So all of these languages that are not really native language to, for example, refugees or asylum seekers as a target group. Okay. Aside from that, you have conference interpreters. How do you become a conference interpreter? You need a postgraduate diploma. So after you've finished a bachelor or even a master, you can take this extra degree. And this is specifically for the simultaneous format. Okay. because conferences, yeah, it's never going to be consecutive. You're never going to be sitting next to to the listener, let's say. It's fully focused on simultaneous interpreting. So you practice in the booth with a headset, with a microphone, etc. So obviously, within the setting of politics, of international relations, conferences at a European level, for example. So yeah, Belgium is obviously a very good place to have this skill or this kind of diploma due to Brussels being so central. Okay. Business interpreters, I think maybe some of you have said that they have had some businesses of their own, but I don't know if interpreting was also part of the business. Basically, what does it mean? You just need to have a bachelor. It's not a requirement necessarily. You can even have applied linguistics or whatever. So you can be an in-house interpreter for a company, right? And that you can use in the consecutive form, simultaneous form, chuchotage as well. So whispered can also be a part of the reality of a business interpreter. So we are focusing here on the private sector, on companies, on corporate communication. Actually, in a sense, is what that offensive interpreter was supposed to be doing, the one who said that she speaks 7 languages, etc. So in that kind of business meeting setting, you would expect a professional business interpreter. So this is it's within this field that that she would be communicating with other clients, with other companies, for example, or negotiating or presenting a factory, for example. I mean, translating the tour of a factory, obviously, guided tours, meetings, seminars, etc. That's business interpreting. Okay. What some of you may know or have experience with as a sworn interpreter, court or legal interpreter. The name says it all, so it's related to the legal field of work. Dua, do you have any question regarding the business interpreters or sworn?
It's both.
As for me,
but
we
if
can
you could
continue.
keep my hand raised so we don't forget.
Yeah, okay. You have a question?
Yes.
Okay, you come back to me when I finish this part with the sworn interpreter. So, how do you become a sworn interpreter? In the meantime, you need to have a degree in order to do this. So, a degree through UGent or Leuven, for example, at the campus in Antwerp. It is mainly focused on consecutive interpreting, and in some cases, whisper interpreting. So that was also my question to Bushra early on. Simultaneous is not really expected of you, but obviously whispered interpreting is, in a sense, a form of simultaneous interpreting. You can't take notes, for example. So that kind of technique won't help you. You won't develop it unless you're doing consecutive interpreting. And also tap interpreting means that sometimes you have to listen to tapped phone calls, scripts, for example, and interpret based on those recordings. Yeah. Obviously, this is a different context. It's legal, courthouse, police sometimes, and takes place within an interrogation or within a trial, for example, in the courthouse. If you have this kind of training, then you can get registered under the National Register of Sworn Translators. So this is the judicial, the list of sworn interpreters that have credentials here in Belgium. Dua, let me know what your question is.
Yes. So is there a training like this one that we're taking for public services that we can take and then get certified work as sworn interpreters?
Yes, so these are the degrees that you can obtain at the University of Ghent or the University of KU Leuven on their campus in Antwerp.
But is it a bachelor's degree or a master's degree? Is it a bachelor's or a master's degree?
It's a postgraduate. It's a postgraduate. So, but that means, if I'm not mistaken, that you do have to have a bachelor's degree in order to enroll. If I'm not mistaken.
A bachelor's in translation or interpretation?
No, just in general.
Oh, okay,
Yes.
okay. Well understood, thank you. And another thing, when it comes to marriage, so sometimes someone gets married in the commune here in Belgium, but one of the spouses doesn't speak French or Dutch, and there needs to be an interpreter. In that case, marriage, divorce, municipality, thingies, or even meeting with lawyers for asylum cases, can we as public service interpreters do it, or we must be sworn interpreters first?
So do you mean when interacting with lawyers?
Yeah, so yeah, when interacting with lawyers to translate from the lawyer to the client and vice versa, or at the municipality when there is a marriage to translate for the spouse who doesn't speak an official Belgian language.
Well, I wouldn't know in which case you would have to interpret for a spouse when there's a wedding, let's say. Me, for example, I've had to interpret numerous times for the city of Ghent, for example, at the Department of convenience marriages. So in order to identify whether people are really getting married for the right reasons or purely for their residence documents. This is something that in Ghent, so they work with public service interpreters in Ghent, but I know that in Antwerp they work with sworn interpreters. So there's even a difference in in city council decisions at that level. Busha, if you have something to add?
Yeah, I just wanted to add that this type of assignments are usually done by sworn translators, because you're obliged to identify yourself as a certified translator before you can actually do the interpretation job. Otherwise, I don't think it will be allowed for any other person who is not certified to join the conversation or to do the assignment, the interpretation assignment during such an interview.
But then the city of Ghent chooses for public service interpreters within the investigation of convenience marriages, for example. So basically it depends on the organization or institution that needs an interpreter, right? And does that institution have a contract with our agency? So with the public service interpreting department of Flanders, of Ghent, of Antwerp, etc. So it depends on their agreements and their contracts. Obviously, a lawyer is not a public service, so I can imagine in this case, like Busha also says, they will go to sworn interpreters, or maybe the lawyers will ask the clients to go look for interpreters themselves. And in that case, the clients can take a look in the register at the courthouse to see which available legal interpreters are active in the area. Yeah. But If it's a public service, like anything social, anything related to education, to hospitals, etc., welfare. Normally, these are the organizations that have a contract with the interpreting services so that they can request assignments with public service interpreters. Yeah. I see also a related question from Casa. Can't these different types be treated by the public service interpreter? So, yeah, it's a bit split up, let's say. But the different types, as you can see, the business interpreter, this is not really our field of work, right? A business interpreter is really, is also usually employed by a company, right? So represents a company. Whereas public service interpreters have to stay neutral. We don't represent the client. We also don't represent the social assistant or the counselor, right? We only represent the code of ethics, and we are there to mediate language communication. But other than that, we have no other interest or advantage, let's say. In the previous, as you can see in the previous slide, a conference interpreter is specialized in simultaneous interpreting. We do not offer any kind of training of simultaneous interpreting here during our program, right? So a public service interpreter would be completely mismatched at a conference because they are not skilled, they are not trained to do simultaneous interpreting. And yes, obviously you can also have a master's degree, but then you still have to get employed. And the moment when you get employed, you have to show extra credentials or have to show that you have, so for example, for translating or interpreting in a school, you need to have the certificate of public service interpreter. You need to be registered with one of the departments. That's the only way in which you will get the assignments, right? So either employed in-house or as a freelancer, carry out these assignments. I hope that's a clear answer to you, Casa. I understand the question, of course. Right, just to go very, very briefly over the last two, sign language interpreting, okay, great, Casa. Sign language interpreting is also very language specific, very region specific. For example, here in Flanders, we have the Flemish Sign Language Center, right? This will differ from, I suppose, I don't know if there's a Walloon, so the French speaking part of Belgium, but it's definitely a different language altogether. Also different from sign language in the US or in Romania, let's say. So these are separate kinds of trainings if you want to become a sign language interpreter. Obviously, it's not spoken language. So you could say, yeah, but it's also not written. So it's a kind of non-verbal, not written language. You see sign language interpreters very often on TV, right? News is being translated with sign languages, or cultural events like the Super Bowl in the US. They have a tradition where they have a sign language interpreter in the corner to interpret the music that is being played during halftime, for example. So keep that in mind. And asylum interpreters, some of you have this experience already, requires no training, but obviously it's an advantage if you can show a certificate of of public service interpreting, right? They will definitely see it as a plus. It's also in consecutive form, so basically you're there to interpret during the interviews, right? During the procedure where the asylum seeker is telling their story, how they fled. And usually this entails at least 2 interviews, okay? At FedAsil, at the Immigration Department at DVZ, or at the Commissioner General for Refugees and Stateless People. So this is the work context of asylum interpreters. But here you have no prerequisite in order to apply. But I know a lot of people who also take our training as public service interpreter, and yeah, see it as a big plus to work as an asylum interpreter as well. Okay, and here you can see the various settings. So a conference setting with booths, a police setting, okay, sign language interpreting. This is more of a social field, let's say. Again, conference interpreting, conference, and sworn in court. Okay. And I suggest so for the public service interpreter that we continue next time. Obviously, whoever wants to take a look at the presentation on Google Drive is free to do so. But normally our next class on interpreting techniques will be on the 27th of September. In case I noticed that we should be seeing these things a bit earlier on, I will switch classes, or maybe do half a day of terminology next time and half a day of interpreting techniques, just so that we have that basis before we start taking notes, because that is definitely very, very important. Okay. I don't know if anybody else still has a question related to the content of today's presentation and topic. And otherwise, I see that Osama had a question for everybody. Zahra, please tell me.
No, I was just going to ask if this has been recorded. Can we see the recording so that not only the slides, but the recording also? Is it possible?
Yes, so I'm still recording, and once I finish the call, the recording will stop, but I still have to check where my recordings get saved, and then do some WeTransfers with the group.
Then there is one thing. You said that the next one is going to be on the 27th of September?
No, so normally the next interpreting techniques class is scheduled on the 27th of October. So, of September. September.
But here on my schedule, like I did some calendar. In my calendar, there is something on the 11th and there's the 13th.
Yes, yes. We have classes in between. But that's why I was saying if it turns out that it would be more convenient to do interpreting techniques next week, for example, then I will shorten the terminology class to half, for example, next week. It's also on the Wednesday. So then do half a day of terminology and half a day of interpreting techniques.
Okay.
Then it's still, we're still on track.
Then I will send you probably the attendance stuff, because I have some challenges to meet there. I'll send you an email.
Just email me so that we know how to work in for future classes. Okay.
Okay. Thank you.
All right. So I will check to see where the recordings have been saved on the cloud or on our platform, and then I will definitely inform you by email how you can download that. Okay. Also for Mahmoud, who was asking on the chat. Dua. We can't hear you.
I'm so sorry.
No problem.
One last question, if possible, please. So once we finish the training, hopefully, and pass all the tests and obtain the public service certificate, are we able to get registered as public service English, Arabic, Arabic, English translators at the municipalities here in Belgium? And is it just the municipality where we live, or can we also register ourselves in other communes, other municipalities?
So the registration as an interpreter will take place with the interpreting services, right? And there are 4 interpreting services in Belgium. You have our service at Agentschap. You have the interpreting service of Ghent, of Antwerp, and of Brussels. The generic one at Agentschap is for the entire Flanders except for the 3 cities, Ghent, Antwerp, and Brussels. So basically you register with them. You don't register with a school or with a hospital or whatever. It's the matchers working in these 4 services that will send the assignments to you, right? So that's where you have to register. And yes, normally that should be possible because Belgium is part of the European project. So there will be instances where you can offer your services. So English as the language of the counselor or the social assistant, and the language of lesser diffusion, like Arabic, for example, for the client. But even aside from that, normally you will also be able to work throughout Europe by video. That's the whole idea of the platform that will be released. So if there's any more questions on that, you can also feel free to email me. You can also address those questions when you see Anais, because she's also a bit more up to date, up to speed on the projects, on the big framework, let's say. Okay.
Thank you so much.
Okay. Just taking a look at the chat. I see that Osama had a question. What is the most difficult thing for you to translate? Maybe that will take a bit too long, but if anybody here wants to answer, maybe just one suggestion that I have now towards the end is, would you guys like to have a WhatsApp group in order to communicate between classes, maybe share material or share information? Because in that case, maybe one of you can take the initiative of making a group, and then you can just simply share a QR code. So people can then scan the QR code with their phones, and then they automatically get into that WhatsApp group. You don't have to start writing down phone numbers or whatever. And anyway, on the 16th of September, the idea is to see each other for the first time in real life. So whoever still needs to join that group can also do it manually. But I don't know if there's anybody who wants to take the initiative to form the group on WhatsApp and just share the link or the QR code.
Okay, I will do that.
Zahra, okay, thank you very much.
You're
If
most
you
welcome.
experience any difficulties, let me know.
Okay.
It's just I notice it's better if students do it, also because during your second module, I won't be working anymore because I will be on maternity leave. So it's better that somebody else is the moderator.
Okay. No, I will have also some other people to share that the management of the group, so that it's going to be easier in case one of us is absent. So I will. One thing I wanted to ask, for us who are deployed from other countries like Italy, we do not we do not deal directly with Fedasil. It's
No,
through
in that
this
case,
company. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm not a Belgium resident. I'm a resident of Italy. Can I still register in the communes to have a direct access to the work, to the opportunities, like with the different entities, or is it not permissible?
So normally, because you guys are part of this project, you will be assigned these assignments through the platforms, through the European platform. So as far as I've understood, it doesn't matter where you reside, right? You will be able to get these assignments with English as a working language and your language of lesser diffusion for the client, and that you will be able to work throughout Europe. So that you won't, I don't think that you will have to individually register with Brussels, Ghent, Antwerp, Flanders. I think this will all happen through the platform once you get the certificate.
Okay.
But this is definitely a question I will ask Laura and get back to you by next time.
Okay.
All
Okay.
right.
All right. Thank you.
All right. You're very welcome. I hope everybody had a good start today and that you feel just as motivated as before.
Yes, we are.
Thank you very much. I'm also very pleased to meet all of you. And I have to say, for me, it was a really nice and enjoyable start of an exciting module, because it's the first time that we teach in English. And also for me, it's the first time that I will be teaching stuff like interpreting techniques and terminology and speaking skills. So it's quite a lot of challenges at once for me, but I have to say you guys are very reassuring. So thank you for all the interaction today. And hopefully, I saw somebody was even asking for homework in the chat. If you want, you can take a look at the remainder of this presentation of interpreting techniques. And I will also be uploading some exercises, but the idea is to be able to do those things during class or during the practice sessions with Anais. So don't feel that you are lagging behind in any way. And even if you don't get to see those items in the practice sessions, you would still have some time to do these things at home before the test day. Okay? But for now, let's take it one topic at a time. And maybe if you want, you can refresh by so you refresh your memory by watching the recording for today's class. That could be a good way to stay in touch. Okay, Zahra, you have one question?
Okay. No, that was it. Thank you so much, and I appreciate. And it was a pleasure meeting everybody here.
I think the same too. So thank you very much for your kind words also on the chat, Bushra, as well. I hope you have a nice week. If there's anything, any issue or any question or suggestion, please let me know. You can email me. Zahra will be making the WhatsApp group. So Zahra, if you want, you can send me the information on how to join the WhatsApp group, and I will send it to the entire group because maybe you don't have each other's email addresses at this point yet. So if that's fine by you.
I'll do that.
All right.
Okay.
Perfect. Then I hope you have a relaxing evening. And
thank you so much.
You're very welcome. We'll see each other again next week on Wednesday.
See you next week. Bye-bye.
Okay, goodbye, everybody.
All right.
Bye-bye, everybody.